The male and the female, and they...
Oh!
We interrupt this program for a very special report.
The age of innocence. Where has it gone?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adam Avante. You might have seen me in other theories of communication videos, such as the diffusion theory, the cultivation theory, and the sender-receiver model. Today, we're going to talk about cartoon violence, video game violence, lyrics in music, and sex on TV with our ace reporters. Take it away, ladies.
The television industry that cartoon violence is not harmful because it is clearly not real. Very young children tend to believe that everything they see on TV is real, and violence in cartoons and other fantasy programs can be detrimental to young children who may think such programs are real and thus mimic behavior that they see. There were 2 television studies conducted in the last few years during the late 90s. National Television Violence Study, which was the joint effort of several prominent research universities and measures the violence on network, independent, local, public, and cable television. They found that high-risk portrayals of violence occurred in children's programs where attractive characters inflicted justified, realistic, remorseless violence on victims who appeared to suffer few consequences. Basic cable channels targeted at children carried the majority of these programs. The UCLA study conducted by the UCLA Center for Communication Policy focuses on violence on network television. There were 3 violence categories: slapstick, tame combat, and sinister combat. They found that the majority of network kids shows fit into the slapstick violence category.
You are about to witness my finest hour. Garfield, you are a genius. Ah, customers.
Oh, Brad, this is perfect. I love it.
Just think, Mona, a little paint and some wallpaper and we can move right in.
A little what? It's a long story.
Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, heroes in a half shell, turtle power.
Now this is very tasty. I mean, you look at him, you look at you. You're a match set.
The Eric Digest, the Educational Resources Information Center, conducted a study in 1997, wrote an article where research suggests 3 areas in which watching violent television programs can impact young viewers. They can encourage children to learn aggressive behavior and attitudes, cultivate fearful or pessimistic attitudes about the non-TV world, and desensitize children to real-world and fantasy violence. The effect is not limited to children who are already disposed to being aggressive and is not restricted to this country. The National Cable Television Association definition of television violence is any overt depiction of the use of physical force or a credible threat of physical force intended to physically harm an animate being. It also includes a depiction of physically harmful consequences against an animate being or group that occur as a result of unseen violent means. But the consequences of violence, especially true in cartoons, kids learn that there are few, if any, repercussions for committing violent acts. Media violence is especially damaging to children under 8 years old because they cannot easily tell the difference between real life and fantasy. And the violent images may seem very real. There was a study conducted in the late 1970s and then again in 2003 involving children who watch a lot of violent television and they have a heightened risk of aggressive adult behavior. Interviewed at ages 6 to 9 in the late 70s and again in their early 20s. There were 329 participants. TV violence suggests to young children that aggression is appropriate in some situations, especially when it is used by charismatic heroes. It arose a natural aversion to violence. As children, participants were rated for exposure to violence after they chose 8 favorite shows from 8 popular programs for their age group and indicated how often they watched them. And it is assessed by researchers for the amount of physical violence. Roadrunner cartoons were deemed the most violent. As adults, men that scored in the top 20 on childhood exposure were twice as likely as other men to have pushed, grabbed, or shoved their wives during an argument in the year preceding the interview. Women who scored in the top 20% were twice as likely as other women to have thrown something at their husbands. Both were more likely than other study participants in the previous year to have shoved somebody in anger, punched, beaten, or choked an adult, or committed a crime or a moving traffic violation.
Thank you, Allison. This just in. Michael Carneal, a 14-year-old from Paducah, Kentucky, ripped through his high school, killing 3 students. Mike Breen is representing the surviving families of the 3 students filing a $100 million lawsuit. If you listen in on the events going on in the courtroom, you can hear Breen explaining the case. Michael Carneal clipped off 9 shots in about a 10-second period. 8 of those shots were hits. 3 were head and neck shots and were kills. That is way beyond the military standard for expert marksmanship. This was a kid who had never fired a pistol in his life, and because of his obsession with computer games, he had turned himself into an expert marksman. According to David Walsh, 79% of American children now play computer or video games on a regular basis. Children between the age of 7 and 17 play for an average of 8 hours a week. With this amount of attention given to the games by kids, Americans should know what their children are playing. No longer are we staring at a blank screen, bouncing a ball back and forth with minimal graphics and sound effects as in Pong, the first video game. Today, video games contain motion picture-like graphics, and with these advances come significant effects. The newer generation of interactive games has changed radically in their sophistication, graphics, realism, and interactivity and level of violence and gore, allowing players to actively participate in more realistic violent action than ever. For example, the game Manhunt for PlayStation 2 has a 5-star scale system that rates players on the brutality of their killings, completely pushing the envelope of violence. According to Craig Anderson, a psychologist with the American Psychology Association, a majority of the recent video games rewards players for killing innocent bystanders, police, and prostitutes, using a wide range of weapons including guns, knives, flamethrowers. So what kind of effects are these games having on kids? Researchers at Iowa State University found that teenagers with non-aggressive personalities who played violent video games 9 hours or more per week were 10 times more likely to get in a physical fight than teens who did not play such games, including those with aggressive personalities. There are things being done in the fight against such violence. The Mothers Against Violence in America have launched a radio campaign to inform listeners about such violence in video games. The public service announcements feature children's voices, casually referencing virtual crimes that they committed while playing some of the games. For example, one little boy is heard saying, "I ran over this lady, and she was still alive, so I set her on fire." The hope is that these shocking statements will encourage parents to pay more attention to the games their children are playing.
Thank you, Janine. Advocates feel that listening to the music is a healthy and normal way for one to vent frustration and anger. They believe that music is becoming a scapegoat for acts committed by previously unstable listeners, many of who come from inadequate homes or were targets of ridicule at school. Adversaries, however, believe that the violent lyrics are undoubtedly responsible for such actions. To defend the degree of influence that music has on listeners, one can argue that audiences are exposed to so many different and contradictory elements of media that it is ultimately left to the audience itself to choose what to be influenced by and how to be influenced. One can also argue that the total record sales of well-known artists with violently explicit lyrics such as Eminem, Cannibal Corpse, and NWA, far exceeds the number of incidences which listeners carry out violent crimes. However, a recent study conducted by the American Psychological Association contradicts this common notion that violent music acts only as an outlet of emotion. The study has found that violent song lyrics do, in fact, have a serious impact on listeners, and that the songs containing violent scenarios, situations, and/or contents do have the ability to increase aggressive and hostile thoughts and emotions in listeners. Earlier today, I went out on the street to do some interviews at the Stockton College in New Jersey to see how students felt about the influence of violent lyrics on their lives. Music do you listen to?
I listen to basically anything except for pop.
No, do you listen to any rap or any hardcore music like that that would have violent lyrics or situations?
Yes.
Do you feel as though those lyrics have an effect on you, that it causes more aggression or anger in you after you listen to them or while you listen to them?
Actually, when I listen to rap and the heavier stuff, it seems to get the aggression and anger out of me.
Does it?
That's really the only time I listen to it. And it does help with the aggression and anger.
I would have to say that I believe that one of the most significant ways in which students get messages is through media, music, sound, and visual. And so I think we have evidence that something negative is resulting from negative energy that we have an obligation to create some interventions and some choices for students. So I would like to see us moving towards creating music that is positive.
What would you say if a student says in defense of the music that it's a tool for venting frustration, anger, things like that, and doesn't really have an effect on themselves?
I would support that. I don't think that all negative music results in negative behavior. There are motivations strictly from negative lyrics, and I would be concerned that by all means everybody has the right to and should enjoy the pleasures of listening to any music that turns them into a happy place, but I'm not quite sure that the student's behavior, if it's negative, should not be addressed. I think that it's cause to examine how far this is going.
How do you feel about the accusations that violent music lyrics have an effect on listeners?
Well, I don't think it really has an effect on listeners, so I'm kind of like a supporter of, not a supporter of violent music. I just don't think that it's good for children that are underage, because they're probably more affected by the lyrics than it. Because if you told me to go out and shoot 20 police in your song, I'm not going to go out and shoot 20 police. I have common sense. But if you tell like a mob of kids in like a cult-like way to go out and kill 20 police, you never know what they're going to do, because we're more avid listeners than they are. So.
Do you feel as though music has turned into a scapegoat, just something to point a finger at, to blame violent acts of teenagers on, rather than their home life or their treatment in school?
I don't think so. It just also depends on like the parents. Parents will control things, and also the peer pressure, also the social environment and stuff too. There's really a lot of things that influence the files of the children. So. And also you can see just not in the violence rap music too. Also you can see like the video games they make it now. They say like mature teens, all of the movie things, yeah.
Thank you, Laura. Now I want to talk a little bit about sex. What can I tell you about this that you don't already know? Or how about this? What can I tell your little brother or sister about sex that they don't already know? Probably nothing. In fact, they could teach me a thing or two. The truth is, sex has always been a part of society. Anyone that tells you otherwise is lying. As we all know, we would not be here if it wasn't for sex. But the question that is relevant here is sex appropriate for television programs that children will be watching? Now there is nothing wrong with a little visual stimulation to get things going, but we're all in college and it's more than allowed for our consumption. But what about impressionable children? What effects does sex on television have on them? Well, there have been various studies done about children mirroring what they see, and the truth is there is no hard evidence on this subject. But according to the Center for Media and Public Affairs, sexual material on television, mainly primetime TV programs, has declined by almost 30% in recent years. Broadcast networks have declined by 31%, and premium cable channels, including HBO and Showtime, dropped by 49%. However disappointing these statistics may be to all of you, these are the facts. Although, take some solace in knowing that sexual content has remained the same in blockbuster movies. For the purposes of this special report, I would like to show you a clip or two of extremely sexually explicit material that I have found on several programs. And you can decide for yourselves if you think it's appropriate for children. Well, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties, folks, but I'm sure you can use your imagination. Now on to some interesting findings from the Journal of Applied Psychology. Studies show that people who watch television programs that have strong sexual references or violence are less likely to remember commercials in between the programming. These include individuals of all ages and genders that are more likely to forget advertisements when distracted during the show. In fact, the most popular programs that include such distractions are worse shows for advertisers to place their commercials. And you thought sex sells.
Remember, the media is both powerful and powerless. It's only as important as we make it to be. So if sex and violence sell, of course, it'll be important to the society. So as us, as the communicators, as the consumers, we must decide what we find to be of entertainment value. We should be better human beings all around. We should be better role models to our youth and better human beings to our fellow brothers and sisters. So if you don't like something about society, change it. And the best way to change it is by taking a stand. Thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. And most importantly, if you don't like something, just turn it off.